music is important, but especially folk music, because its indigenous source is not affected by anything artificial. It's all completely natural. The kind of thing that I write, I tend to use a crossover between ethnic music, sort of indigenous cultures, and then the more sort of pop culture, and I use a lot of hip-hop. I've written 2 melodies for a friend of mine called Hamish Henderson, who's a poet. I'd written this fiddle tune, and it was written after a poem that he wrote called FLORET SILVA UNDIQUE, which is, translation is, I think it's all around the flora is in bloom, basically. It's about sort of springtime or summer in Edinburgh. The other tune, the pipe tune, is a sort of march. Well, first of all, I've got this fiddle tune, which is called, well, I've called it FLORET SILVA UNDIQUE. It doesn't really, I just called it that. It might as well be called Mrs. Macpherson's Handbag, but I sort of wrote it for Hamish, and it's actually a really quite an Irish tune. The march that is on the pipes is really quite Scottish, so I thought because he's spent a lot of time in Ireland, I should have a sort of Irish sort of feel to it. So it goes something like this. The rhythm is fairly laid back, it's got a sort of swing to it, and so the first place that I go from, I think, is to try and establish some sort of rhythm to get a breakbeat. I've taken basically this sample here. Because the tunes are in E and D, I'm going to sort of use the notes E and D as a motif, and I was going to probably put it in a bass sound. There, it's just like a big sine wave, as they call it. So I put that together. That's it. So what I really need to work out now is what kind of chords I'm going to use on top. I tend to use something very sort of abstract and quite simple. So if I put that together, the only other thing that I would do to that now was to put something in that would just basically make it sound really big. Some sort of chant in the background, somebody sort of singing, you know. A sort of percussion instrument that might go with that might be the tabla. Shape now. So there we go, that's the basics behind the whole piece now, and I don't have to write very much else. This is a kind of wave sound, and if I bend it down using E and D, that motif, that's quite a nice effect. So if I record that, that's it looping on itself. I'm going to try and come from a really simple sound one with nothing around it at all, and build upon that. I don't really know what, so I think probably the notes E and D would be a good place to start from. Maybe something like an ambient string sound, you know, something that sounds like it's in a huge room, makes it sound very large and but far away. So I've got a sort of string-ish sound in it set, and that's all it is, E and D. And against that, I thought if there was some sort of very sparkly, spicy kind of, like a very small cymbal or a triangle, and then perhaps a gong at the bottom end of it. And also a sort of Turkish cymbal. Ping, ping. And various other kind of, you know, like a triangle with a really big reverb. I'll try putting in some of the other percussion parts now. See, it's just very, very, very random, you know. I don't know, something will establish itself from that. I'll try something on the flute now. I don't know what I'm going to play. It's basically when you've written a section and haven't got a melody to go on top. Some people might think that's more difficult to write a melody on top of that, but all I'm doing is I'm listening to the way the piece goes and then trying to improvise on top of it, you know, just messing around basically. So. There's a tune and an ambient beginning. From here on, I think I'll probably bring in the tablas again, and with the jingling bells, you know, it's quite Eastern sound, so perhaps I think a bit of voice would be nice. Right, so if I try recording here. There we have something quite different, you know. And it's also establishing a rhythm as well. And I think at that point I'll bring in the FLORET SILVA UNDIQUE. FLORET is the queen of lusty me, the lily, the rose I'm just going to write something down to try and sort of work out some sort of structure and form. So I've got the introduction, which was that ambient section on the flute with the cymbals and the gongs, and between that and the recitation of the poem, I've got the sort of Islamic chant, and that's where the rhythm comes in. So chant rhythm, and then I'll have 16 bars with the poem. What comes in there, I think, was the organ riff. That's 16 bars. Then the fiddle comes in and establishes itself, and that'll be only 8 bars. And then the break beats come in after that for 16 bars. So you can see it's a sort of progression, especially layering wise. There's more and more being put on each time. So we come out of that, and I think probably I'll have a middle section of poetry, of his poem, and the sort of ambience of the piece. I'm probably going to whisper, you know, "FLORET SILVA UNDIQUE, the lily, the rose I lay," something like that. Very, very, just like whispering and quite intimate. And then the middle section, I think, just because Hamish is a bit of a lad as well, I'm going to shout it as loud as I can and as sort of crudely as I can. The only other thing I have to do now is to try and work out how I'm going to get from E to D into this pipe tune. So I'll probably use something like the chants. They don't really say any sort of key at all, they're just basically themselves. And also some percussion. And maybe if the strings were say, E, D, I don't see anything wrong with that being played on top of the D section as well. I could have a bass in D. It'd be quite sinister for a bit. And perhaps something new, like some new percussion that we haven't heard before, just to change the mood of the section. Something like some pipe drumming, because it's going into a more military style tune. Kind of thing. If I put that over the top of the Islamic chant, that might sound quite nifty. I don't know yet, but we'll have to try it. So the bass line is going to have to be different as well. I think probably a fifth. I like fifths. Let's see what happens then. Now I can hear something happening now between the bass line and that bass kick. And it's a sort of like the bass kick is taking on a note of its own. So if I put in, sorry, so I've got a new bass line now for that. That's basically all of my piece, and the only thing now left is just one more verse of the poem, which I think just balances it out because this is a new section. The intro had one verse, the fiddle had one verse of poem, and now this should have one verse. And there we have it, and back to the old pipe tune, and that's it. sweeten the air till darkness.